Arrogant landlord evicts a single mother, then finds out who she really is. The cold metal lock clicked as the door was sealed shut. Mia stood frozen, her 8-year-old son Ethan gripping her coat tightly. Tears welled in his eyes, but he stayed silent, just like his mother had taught him. Richard Langley, the landlord, dusted off his expensive suit and sighed. "Nothing personal, Mia. Just business." Mia swallowed hard. No home, no help, nowhere to go. The locksmith packed up his tools, avoiding her eyes. The neighbors peeked from behind their doors but said nothing. Richard smirked, slipping his keys into his pocket. "People like you never learn." Mia exhaled slowly. "And people like you never see the fall coming." Richard chuckled, walking away. He had no idea. But soon he would. Mia Thompson stood outside the locked apartment door, her arms wrapped tightly around Ethan. The wind had picked up, blowing against her thin coat, but she barely noticed. She had lost everything in a matter of minutes. The apartment complex loomed behind her, a tall, gray building that had once felt like home. It wasn't fancy, but it had been safe. Now, it was just another place she wasn't welcome. She turned toward Richard Langley, who was already walking toward his luxury car. Tall, well-dressed, and full of himself, he was the kind of man who saw people as numbers, not humans. To him, Mia was just another late payment, another problem to get rid of. Mia had lived in the building for 5 years. She had always paid on time until a few months ago when she lost her job. She wasn't lazy, she wasn't irresponsible. She was just struggling, like so many others. But Richard didn't care. "You should have made better choices," he had told her the last time she begged for more time. Now, he didn't even bother looking at her as he climbed into his car. "Find somewhere else," he said before slamming the door shut. Mia's hands clenched into fists, not because of the eviction, but because of the way he had done it. No warning, no kindness, just a smirk and a lock change. Ethan sniffled, rubbing his eyes. "Where will we go, Mom?" Mia bent down, pushing his messy brown curls away from his face. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll figure it out." She had no idea where they would sleep tonight, but she couldn't let him see her fear. As she stood, the neighbors who had been watching quickly shut their doors. No one wanted to get involved. That was fine. Mia wasn't looking for pity. She just hoped Richard Langley had enjoyed his little moment of power. Because soon, he'd realize just how big of a mistake he had made. Mia held Ethan's hand as they walked away from the apartment complex. She didn't know where they were going, just that they couldn't stay there. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Ethan was tired. He didn't complain, but she could feel the weight of his small fingers gripping hers. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, hoping for a job offer, a miracle, anything. Instead, it was another rejection. Mia sighed and slipped the phone back into her coat. No job, no home, no options. Richard Langley had made sure of that. She could still hear his voice in her head. "People like you never learn." Mia clenched her jaw. People like him thought they were untouchable. She'd seen it before. Rich men who played with people's lives like it was a game. To Richard, she was nothing, just another struggling tenant who could be replaced. And he was right about one thing. She had made a mistake. But it wasn't the one he thought. Her mistake was letting him think he had won. Meanwhile, in Richard Langley's office, Richard leaned back in his leather chair, feet propped up on his desk. His office was large, filled with modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Another eviction, another problem solved. He didn't feel bad about Mia. People like her always had excuses. If he let one person stay rent-free, others would expect the same. This was business, not charity. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. His assistant, Claire, walked in, holding a stack of papers. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, placing the documents on his desk. Richard glanced at them, uninterested. "Unless it's money coming in, I don't care." Claire hesitated. "It's about Mia Thompson." Richard smirked. "The single mother? Let me guess, she's complaining?" Claire's face was pale. "No, sir. It's about who she really is." Richard frowned. "What are you talking about?" Claire took a deep breath. "Mia Thompson isn't just some struggling single mother. She's the daughter of Robert Thompson." Richard's smirk disappeared. Robert Thompson. The name hit him like a brick. A billionaire real estate mogul. One of the most powerful investors in the country. A man whose influence could destroy entire companies with a single phone call. Richard's heart pounded. No, this had to be a mistake. He had just evicted the daughter of one of the most powerful real estate investors in the country. Mia sat in a small cafe with Ethan, watching him stir his hot chocolate. She had spent years building her own life away from her father's shadow. She wanted to prove she could do it on her own. But Richard Langley had made a mistake, and now she had no reason to hold back. She pulled out her phone and made a call. "Dad, we need to talk." Richard Langley sat frozen in his chair, his smirk long gone. Mia Thompson, daughter of Robert Thompson. How had he not known? His mind raced. Robert Thompson wasn't just a wealthy man. He was a legend in real estate. He owned properties in multiple cities, sat on corporate boards, and had the power to make or break any landlord in the industry. Richard felt a cold sweat forming on his brow. He grabbed his phone and dialed Mia's number, but it went straight to voicemail. This couldn't be happening. A few hours ago, she had been a desperate single mother standing in front of his apartment complex, with nowhere to go. Now, she held all the power, and he had just made her an enemy. Mia sat across from her father in his massive office. The walls were lined with books, and the large windows overlooked the city skyline. Robert Thompson, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a commanding presence, sat back in his chair, his sharp eyes studying his daughter. "So, Richard Langley evicted you?" he asked, his voice calm but dangerous. Mia nodded. "No warnings, no sympathy. He locked us out in front of everyone." Her father exhaled, shaking his head. "I never liked that man. Greedy, arrogant." Mia folded her arms. "I didn't want to come to you, Dad. I wanted to make it on my own." Robert's expression softened. "You have nothing to prove, Mia. You're strong. But there's a difference between struggling and being mistreated." Mia's jaw tightened. "I don't want revenge, Dad. I want justice." Robert leaned forward, intrigued. "And what does justice look like to you?" Mia smiled. "I want to buy every single property Richard Langley owns." Her father chuckled, impressed. "Now that is something I can help with." Richard was pacing his office, his nerves unraveling. He hadn't slept. He had made countless calls trying to fix the damage, but nobody was picking up. Then the worst call of all came. His bank. "Mr. Langley, we have an urgent issue. Your real estate accounts are frozen." Richard's throat went dry. "What? That's impossible." The banker hesitated. "Actually, it's very possible. A major investor just bought out your debt. You no longer own any of your properties." Richard staggered back into his chair. "Who bought them?" he demanded. There was a pause. Then the banker spoke the name that sent a chill down Richard's spine. Mia Thompson. Richard's heart slammed against his chest. Mia now owned every single one of his properties. Richard rushed to the office of his former real estate firm. the office that no longer belonged to him. He pushed through the glass doors, past the stunned employees, and burst into the executive meeting room. Mia stood at the head of the long table. She looked calm, powerful, unshaken. Her father stood beside her, but it was clear that Mia was in charge now. Richard stormed toward her. This is illegal. You can't just take my properties." Mia raised an eyebrow. "I didn't take anything. I bought them. Legally." Richard's face twisted in anger. "You have no right." "No right." Mia cut him off, stepping forward. "You had no right to throw me and my son onto the street. No right to treat people like they're disposable. Now, the tables have turned." Richard opened his mouth to argue, but Mia held up a folder. "I have all the documents, every contract, every property transfer. You don't own a single building anymore." Richard's hands trembled as he grabbed the papers. He flipped through them, hoping for a mistake, a loophole, anything. There was none. It was over. He had lost everything. Richard collapsed into a chair, his face pale. Mia placed her hands on the table and leaned in. "You have two options, Richard." Richard looked up, his eyes hollow. "Option 1, you walk away with whatever dignity you have left. Option 2, I expose everything you've done, every unethical eviction, every shady deal." Richard swallowed hard. He had never been on the losing side before. Mia straightened up, her voice firm. "The difference between us, Richard, is that I don't use power to hurt people. I use it to help them." Richard lowered his head. He had spent his entire career looking down on people. Now he was the one at rock bottom, and Mia Thompson had put him there. Richard sat in stunned silence, staring at the contract in his trembling hands. Just yesterday he was at the top, wealthy, powerful, untouchable. Now he was sitting in a conference room, jobless, powerless, and facing the woman he had thrown onto the streets, and she owned everything he once controlled. Mia stood tall, arms crossed, watching him. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. That, somehow, made it worse. "So, what's it going to be, Richard?" Mia's voice was calm. "Are you walking away? Or are we taking this public?" Richard's mouth was dry. His pride screamed at him to fight back. But how? There was nothing left. His mind raced. He could beg. Maybe Mia had a soft spot. Maybe he could convince her to let him stay on in some position. Or he could go down swinging, try to take her reputation with him. He opened his mouth, ready to hurl one final insult, but Mia spoke first. "You know what?" She sighed, shaking her head. "I could ruin you, but I won't." Richard blinked. "What?" Mia leaned forward, placing her palms flat on the table. "I'm not like you." Richard scoffed, trying to hold on to some of his former confidence. "So, what? You're going to let me off easy?" Mia's lips curled into the smallest smile. "Not exactly." She reached into a folder and pulled out another contract. "I'm giving you a job." Richard jerked back like she had slapped him. "What?" Mia slid the papers across the table. "You're going to work for me." Richard's chest tightened. His eyes scanned the document, looking for a trick. It was real. She was offering him a position as a property manager under her new company. A sharp laugh escaped him. "This is a joke, right?" Mia tilted her head. "You think I don't know what it's like to struggle? I've been where you are. I know what it's like to have no options." Richard's hands clenched into fists. She was giving him mercy, but on her terms. He had spent years looking down on people like her, and now she was offering him a lifeline. Mia's voice softened. "People can change, Richard, but only if they want to." Richard felt something he hadn't in a long time. Shame. For years, he had treated tenants like they were beneath him. He had laughed in the face of their struggles. Now, he was the one with nothing. And Mia? She was offering him dignity when he had shown her none. Richard swallowed hard. This was it, his final chance. With shaking hands, he picked up the pen and signed his name. Mia nodded. Good choice. For the first time, Richard Langley had a boss, and it was the woman he had once thrown away like she was nothing. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Real estate giant Robert Thompson's daughter buys out former landlord's business. Arrogant landlord gets evicted from his own empire. Tables turn as evicted single mother becomes the new owner. Richard didn't read them. He didn't need to. He was living them. Now, instead of owning properties, he was sitting behind a modest desk in a small office, a low-level property manager in the company he once ran. His name was no longer on the building. Mia's was. Meanwhile, in Mia's new office, Mia stood by the window, looking down at the city. For years, she had struggled, working 2 jobs, raising Ethan alone, trying to prove she could make it without her father's help. And now, she had built something of her own. Her father walked into the office, nodding in approval. You did good, Mia. This is your company now. Mia turned to him. I want to do things differently, Dad. No more unfair evictions. No more treating people like numbers. Her father smiled. That's why I knew you'd be the right person for this job. Mia glanced at the framed photo on her desk, a picture of her and Ethan. She had fought for this, not for revenge, not for power, but to make sure no mother would ever have to go through what she did. Richard walked into the building, his head down, his steps slower than usual. Employees who once feared him barely acknowledged him. Some whispered, some smirked. He deserved it. As he entered his new office, a small, windowless room, Mia was already waiting. She handed him a folder. Your first assignment. Richard took it carefully, his pride stinging. What is it? Mia's eyes were steady. You're going to review every eviction case you've ever handled, one by one. And you're going to decide how to make it right. Richard's stomach turned. He knew what that meant. For years, he had thrown families out without a second thought. Now, he had to face the damage he had done and fix it. 1 month later, Mia walked through one of her apartment complexes, checking in on tenants. She had already made changes, lowering rent for struggling families, fixing broken heating systems that Richard had ignored, and reaching out to those who had been unfairly evicted. She wasn't just running a business. She was rebuilding lives. As she passed the office, she noticed Richard inside, poring over paperwork. Something was different. He wasn't dismissing complaints. He was actually listening. Mia knocked on the door. Making progress? Richard exhaled. Yeah. He hesitated, then looked up at her. I was wrong, you know. Mia leaned against the doorframe. I know. Richard shook his head. I don't deserve this chance. Mia gave him a small smile. Maybe not. But you have it. What you do with it is up to you. Richard nodded. For the first time in his life, he truly understood what it meant to be on the other side. And it had changed him. That evening, Mia sat on the couch. Ethan curled up beside her, fast asleep. She brushed a hand over his hair, her heart full. They were safe. They had a home. And she had proven herself, not just to her father, not just to Richard, but to herself. She had taken back control, and she had done it the right way. She looked out the window at the city lights, knowing that tomorrow she would wake up not as a victim, but as a leader. And this was just the beginning. Richard Langley thought he was untouchable. He spent years abusing his power, evicting struggling families without a second thought. But when he threw Mia and her son onto the streets, he had no idea who she really was. Now, the tables had turned. Mia didn't just get revenge, she took control. She bought his properties, rebuilt the community, and gave people the second chance that Richard never had. And Richard, he learned the hard way that power isn't about money, it's about how you use it. So, let's ask you, do you think Richard truly changed? Or did he only regret his actions because he lost everything? Let us know in the comments. If you loved this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And for more powerful, eye-opening stories like this, hit that subscribe button now. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay strong, stay just, and stand up for what's right.